When the paramedics wheeled my wife and her lover out of that shabby motel room, the crowd outside froze like they were watching some twisted street performance. Two bodies tangled under a white sheet, screaming, glued together in a way no sane mind could ever imagine. Folks whispered, gasped, pointed. And me? I just stood there under the flickering motel sign, hands in my pockets, pretending I was some confused old man who happened to be nearby. But the truth was simpler, darker, and a whole lot more deliberate. I am Rowan Calder, 64 years old, and I have worked with my hands for over 4 decades. Carpentry, concrete, adhesives, insulation. I know how every material behaves when you push it past its limits. I know what bonds and what breaks. I know how long something takes to set, and I know how to make something look harmless right before it destroys everything it touches. That morning, when they peeled my wife Lena and that 29-year-old trainer off the bed frame and tried to maneuver them onto the stretcher, I finally understood why folks say karma moves slow. It does not. Not when you build it yourself. But before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. I never thought my life would reach a moment like this. 64 years on this earth, and I had seen storms tear roofs off houses. I had seen people fall from scaffolds. I had seen machinery jam and snap like brittle bone. But nothing prepared me for the day I found out my 52-year-old wife was sneaking around with a 29-year-old kid who probably had not lived through enough birthdays to appreciate a stable marriage. It began a week earlier, in our quiet town of Red Haven, nestled between pine-covered hills and a river that always smelled like wet stone. I had returned from a small renovation job earlier than expected. My knees were aching from the cold, so I went upstairs to grab the balm I keep for the joints. Lena always said she hated the smell of it. Too medicinal, she'd complain. But after this many years together, she had her opinions and I had my aches. Her gym bag sat on the dresser, half open like it had been dropped in a hurry. The zipper was slightly askew, the strap twisted. Lena was meticulous about her things. She folded receipts. She aligned shoes by color. She never left a bag open. That alone made me pause. I reached inside, expecting to find maybe her towel or her shaker bottle. Instead, I pulled out something I had not seen her wear in years. A sheer lace garment, deep emerald, delicate enough to tear if you stared too hard at it. Lena had told me for years that intimacy was behind her, that she had grown past needing that kind of connection. I believed her. A fool always believes the person they love. Underneath the lace sat a small bottle of cologne. Not hers. Sharp, citrusy, synthetic. The kind young men wear when they want to smell like confidence without earning any. I recognized it instantly because the smell had lingered in my truck once, a day I had lent my vehicle to Lena because hers was being detailed. At the time, I assumed she had brushed up against someone at her gym. I assumed wrong. Digging deeper, I found a tube of personal lubricant. Sleek, black, premium looking, but it was new. Completely new. Still full. Lena and I had not used anything like that in well over a decade, and that's when the heat rose in my chest, slow and steady like a burner being twisted open. I set the items back exactly where they had been, careful not to disturb the order. I heard the door downstairs. Lena's voice carried up the staircase, cheerful, almost chirping. That was when everything inside me shifted. It was not rage. It was clarity. The kind a builder gets right before deciding where to drive the final nail. She came into the room, saw me holding a simple bottle of aspirin and smiled a little too wide, a little too rehearsed. She thought I was still the same man she married. Slow, trusting, predictable. She had no idea that I already knew. And that knowledge began the chain of events that would lead straight to that motel, that stretcher, and those horrified paramedics. But the moment that truly sealed their fate wasn't the lace or the cologne or the lubricant, it was. The next morning, sunlight washed over Red Haven in that pale, wintry way that never quite warms the bones. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of bitter coffee, staring at Lena as she floated around the house humming some tune I did not recognize. She was in a good mood. Too good. People with secrets often are, right before everything collapses. She kissed the top of my head as she breezed past me, her lips cold, her perfume sharp. It was the kind of gesture wives give their husbands when their heart is already somewhere else. But the lace and the cologne weren't what truly confirmed her betrayal. It was something far more deliberate. Later that afternoon, I headed to my workshop behind the house, a place filled with the smell of sawdust, varnish, old wood, and metal. Tools lined the walls like loyal soldiers. Drills, clamps, adhesives, pliers, chisels. Everything in there had a purpose. Everything could build or destroy depending on the hand guiding it. That's where her car caught my eye. Lena's sedan was parked slightly crooked, unusual for her. She prided herself on perfect angles. A crooked parking job from Lena was like a crooked cut from me, a sign of distraction. Something told me to look inside. I opened the door and the scent hit me immediately. That same synthetic cologne, the one that belonged to a man trying too hard to smell expensive. It clung to the upholstery, and on the passenger side floor, half tucked under the mat, I found a folded receipt from a boutique hotel miles away in another town entirely. Ridgeport, a seaside escape known for its boardwalk, its jazz bars, and its reputation for discretion. The receipt listed a suite for two, booked 3 weeks earlier. Check-in, Friday evening. Check-out, Saturday morning. Lena had told me she'd been attending continuing education workshops for her design job. I believed her then. I didn't now. But that wasn't even the worst part. Written in sloppy handwriting at the bottom of the receipt was a note. Bring the bag this time. The bag. Her gym bag. The one with the lace and the black tube inside. I stood there in the quiet of my workshop, fingers tightening around the receipt, and every memory of the past year rearranged itself into a pattern so painfully obvious I felt foolish for having missed it. But here's the thing about builders like me. Once we see the blueprint clearly, we know exactly where to apply pressure. The rest of the day I played the oblivious husband. I asked Lena about dinner, nodded at her stories, even laughed at some joke she cracked about how forgetful I've become. She thought she had me wrapped up, tucked neatly into the narrative she had built for herself. The aging man who wouldn't see betrayal if it danced in front of him wearing a neon sign. But that night, after she fell asleep, I returned to her gym bag. At first, I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I just wanted to understand her new pattern. So I carefully pulled out the lubricant again and checked the label. Same one. Unused, still sealed tightly. But when I lifted it, I felt something strange. The weight was uneven, almost lighter than it should be. Curiosity can be a dangerous spark. I twisted open the cap and squeezed gently. Nothing came out. That didn't make sense. Premium lubricants don't clump or settle. So I held it up to my workbench light and tilted it. That's when I saw it. The slightest shimmer inside, thicker than it should have been. And in that moment, an idea began forming. Not born out of rage, but precision. The kind of cold, steady calculation that only comes when a man has been wounded so deeply he no longer bleeds. Superglue, industrial grade, fast bonding, heat reactive, colorless when set. You don't live 6 decades as a craftsman without knowing which adhesives can hold steel together and which ones can set under the slightest friction. But even then, I didn't move. Not yet. Revenge, like concrete, needs time to cure. The next morning, Lena announced she'd be heading to Ridgeport again. Work conference, she claimed. She packed her gym bag with that same rehearsed care. And for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I smiled back at her. Because I already knew the trainer she'd been seeing, the 29-year-old boy she'd traded me in for, would be waiting for her there. And I knew exactly what she planned to bring him. But the real turning point wasn't her leaving for Ridgeport. It was the unexpected conversation I overheard that revealed their plan for me. Lena left for Ridgeport on a Thursday morning, suitcase in hand, gym bag slung over her shoulder, moving with the buoyancy of a woman who believed she was gliding towards something thrilling. She kissed my cheek, told me she'd be back late tomorrow, and slipped out the front door before I could even finish my coffee. I watched her car disappear down the road, the early fog swallowing her taillights. The house fell quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it knows something you don't. But I wasn't planning to follow her yet. Not until that afternoon when something happened that shifted the ground beneath my feet. Around midday, I drove into town to pick up a few supplies for a shelving project a neighbor had asked me to help with. Red Haven's hardware store sits on a corner just off the old mill road, a narrow place with uneven floors, dusty windows, and a big bell that clangs whenever someone walks in. As I turned into an aisle of adhesives and solvents, I heard the bell ring again. Two voices drifted from the next row over. Low, hurried, conspiratorial. One of them I recognized instantly. It was Mason Breyer, the smooth-talking real estate agent everyone in town adored for reasons I never understood. Mason was 29, charming in that exhausting way young men can be. All cologne and confidence and restless ambition. He was also the man sleeping with my wife. I froze just behind a tall shelf of wood stains and listened. "Are you sure she's handling it?" an unfamiliar voice asked, older, deeper, with a rasp that sounded like cigarettes and stress. "She's handling it," Mason replied. "She said she's getting him to sign the papers this weekend. Once that's done, he's out of the picture." Papers? My heartbeat ticked up, slow and forceful. "What about the assets?" the older man asked. Mason lowered his voice. "She said he'll never notice the transfer. He relies on her for all the paperwork now." A drop of cold pressure slid through me. I leaned closer. The older man grunted. "She better move quickly. You owe us already, Mason. If you don't square up by next month—" "I know," Mason snapped. "I'm not letting this opportunity slip. He's 64, barely keeping up with repairs on that house. Once she locks down the paperwork, she gets the property, I get my cut, and you get your money. Simple. Property. Cut. Money." They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to take everything I had built, my land, my accounts, my home, and funnel it into the pockets of a man who'd been in Red Haven for barely 3 years. "What if he pushes back?" the older man asked. Mason scoffed. "He won't. Lena says he's slow these days. Foggy, she called it. She'll just tell people he's getting forgetful. No one will question her. Everyone thinks she's the sweet one." It felt as if the floorboards of that cramped hardware store had given out beneath me. Foggy? Slow? Forgetful? They were laying the groundwork to paint me as incompetent, maybe even unstable. Mason's tone made it sound like this was a business transaction, not a betrayal. The older man sighed. "Fine, but if this falls apart, it's your neck on the line." Their footsteps shuffled, and the two of them walked toward the front of the store. I waited behind the shelf until the bell clanged again and the door shut. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the labels on the adhesive bottles in front of me. Every one of them listed their set times, bonding strengths, temperature tolerances. These were things I had known my whole life, the physics of what holds things together and what tears things apart. And standing in that aisle, surrounded by the tools of my old trade, something settled in my chest. Not rage, not grief, but resolve. The kind of cold clarity that comes when a man realizes he has been targeted. They wanted to strip me of everything, then toss me aside like a cracked tile. But the thing about building for a living is this: you also learn how to dismantle, how to weaken a structure so precisely that a single moment can bring it down. I left the store quietly, a plan forming in my mind. Not a wild one, not impulsive. Something measured, engineered. Later that night, when I saw Lena's gym bag still sitting in the hotel room through the cracked curtain, waiting for its moment, everything fell into place. Not only were they plotting to steal my wife and my dignity, they were plotting to erase me. And that's why the very next morning I drove to Ridgeport, not to confront them, but to make sure my plan bonded perfectly before they ever touched it. By the time dawn broke over Red Haven the next day, I already had my truck loaded and idling in the driveway. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, the kind of cold that wakes a man up even when sleep has been shallow. I wasn't going to Ridgeport to argue or to plead. Those days were long behind me. I was going to ensure that the plan I had spent the night refining would slip neatly into place. Every builder knows the same truth. Preparation is the real work. Execution is simply following the lines you already drew. The drive to Ridgeport took just under an hour. Winding roads bordered by frost-covered pines, the distant ocean shimmering under a pale morning sun. Ridgeport looks picturesque from a distance, but when you enter its older district, you start seeing the cracks. Faded signs, patched sidewalks, peeling paint. It's the kind of place that hides secrets well. Lena and Mason had chosen the Driftwood Inn, A place that pretends to be charming with its weather-worn shingles and sea-themed decor. It's also a place where no one asks questions, and no one cares what you bring inside your room. I parked behind an old delivery van where I couldn't be seen from the lobby windows. Then I walked the perimeter of the building slowly like any guest stretching their legs. Room 23, their room, sat on the second floor with a balcony partially hidden by a leaning cedar tree. Curtains were drawn, but her suitcase was visible through the thin sliver where the fabric didn't quite meet. It was still early. Too early for lovers who had spent the night tangled up in their lies. I made my way around to the back stairwell, the one maintenance uses. The driftwood's metal lock was so rusted I could have opened it with a stern look. Instead, I used a thin piece of metal I keep in my wallet for old hinges. The door clicked. I slipped inside. The hallway smelled like bleach, salt, and stale air. I recognized that scent from decades of repairing rundown rentals. I moved quietly, my footfalls cushioned by fraying carpet. Room 23's doorframe had a familiar flaw. The strike plate had been screwed in crooked, leaving just enough play for a careful hand to slip a tool into the latch. I checked the hall. Empty. Then I eased the latch open and stepped inside. The room was dim, the curtains filtering the early light into a soft haze. Lena's gym bag sat near the foot of the bed, half hidden beneath a sweater. Her suitcase was unzipped, clothes spilling out. Mason's jacket was tossed over a chair, his wallet sticking out of a pocket. These details didn't hurt me. They didn't even anger me. They simply confirmed the blueprint. They had already built their version of the future, and it didn't include me. I opened the gym bag carefully. The same items lay inside: the emerald lace, a small perfume bottle, and the black tube Lena had insisted on packing for her work trip. The adhesive mixture I'd prepared the night before sat in my coat pocket, warmed just enough by body heat to flow smoothly. I unscrewed the cap of her lubricant and emptied the contents into a tissue I'd brought. The adhesive slid into the tube like syrup, colorless, scentless, a silent predator waiting for heat and friction to wake it up. When I finished, the tube looked untouched. I wiped the threads of the cap, screwed it back on, and arranged everything exactly where it had been. Builders know misalignment is a confession. Before leaving, I walked to the window and peered between the curtains. Ridgeport's boardwalk stretched along the ocean below, a gull wheeling overhead. Peaceful, almost poetic. Hard to believe what was about to unfold. I slipped out the door, closed it gently, and ensured the latch clicked the way it had before. By the time I reached the stairwell, I felt no trembling, no hesitation. What Lena and Mason planned for me, my home, my accounts, my reputation, was worse than betrayal. It was erasure. This wasn't revenge. This was preservation. Back in my truck, I watched the room from a distance. A half-hour passed before I saw movement behind the curtains, the unmistakable silhouette of two bodies laughing, unaware. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. Their fate was sealed the moment she strapped that gym bag over her shoulder. But what I didn't expect was how quickly things would escalate. Because the moment they opened that tube, everything went wrong far faster and far louder than even I had planned. I stayed parked across from the Driftwood Inn, half hidden behind a row of cypress trees lining the back lot. The morning sun had risen higher now, throwing long stripes of light across the motel balconies. A few early risers shuffled across the parking area with coffee mugs, none of them aware of the storm forming behind the thin walls of room 23. Around mid-morning, I saw Mason's silhouette past the curtains. A moment later, Lena appeared beside him, her body language loose and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. They laughed about something, a light, careless laugh that stung more than anything else I'd discovered so far. But I didn't let it break me. I had already poured the foundation of this moment. Now I was just waiting for the structure to collapse. Minutes later, I saw Lena rummage through her gym bag. I leaned forward in my seat. A quiet breath left my chest when she pulled out the black tube. The same one I had emptied, refilled, and sealed. She unscrewed the cap with the ease of someone used to secrets. Then the curtain swung shut. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew the chemistry better than they did. Superglue reacts fast, faster still with warmth. Friction accelerates every bond. And within moments, the adhesive buried in that tube would begin to harden, gripping skin in a way no human instinct could overcome. Even from the parking lot, I could sense the shift. The first scream was muffled, a sharp, startled sound cut short by confusion. The next one was unmistakable, raw, animal, something between terror and agony. It jolted through the air so violently that a flock of gulls scattered off the boardwalk. Another scream followed, then a crash. Maybe the lamp, maybe the nightstand. I heard the incoherent shouts, the rising panic, the desperate scrabble of bodies discovering too late that they were no longer independent. They were connected, bound, fused. I stepped out of my truck and walked a little closer, blending in with the few motel guests who poked their heads out of their rooms. A grizzled fisherman in a windbreaker stepped onto the balcony and shouted, "What in the world is going on in there?" Another crash answered him. A woman clapped a hand over her mouth. Should we call someone? I already had that covered. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed 911, and let my voice tremble just enough to sound like a distressed bystander. "There's screaming coming from the Driftwood Inn," I said. "Room 23. It sounds like someone's hurt. Please send help." The dispatcher assured me responders were on the way. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my jacket, my heart beating a steady, controlled rhythm. Inside the room, the chaos escalated. Mason shouted in pain, his voice cracking. Lena's cries were sharp, frantic, desperate. The adhesive would have grown painfully hot during the reaction. That was the nature of that particular compound, a heat spike, then rapid hardening. Their attempts to separate would only tear flesh, worsening everything. The door rattled. Someone inside must have tried to yank it open, but the chain lock held. The whole frame trembled from the force. They were panicking, blinded by pain, unaware of how exposed they were about to be. 5 minutes later, the first patrol car screeched into the lot, followed by a second. Paramedics arrived moments after. One officer ran to the balcony. "Red Haven Police, open the door!" The screams inside only grew louder. The officer kicked the door once. Nothing. A second time, it splintered inward with a crack that echoed across the parking lot. Every bystander leaned forward instinctively, and then the silence broke. "Good Lord," one paramedic muttered inside, loud enough that we heard it outside. "They're stuck. They're actually—" His words cut off abruptly. Another paramedic called for a stretcher, her voice strained. "We need to transport them immediately. And someone get blankets. We need to cover—" Her voice dropped, but nothing could hide the horror in her tone. Guests whispered all around me, their expressions a mixture of shock, fascination, and disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," a tourist murmured. "Looks like they're glued," another man said, unable to finish the sentence. When the paramedics finally maneuvered the gurney out of the room, the crowd collectively gasped. Even covered, the grotesque outline of two bodies fused together was unmistakable. Mason wept openly. Lena sobbed into her own shoulder. Every step the paramedics took sent new waves of pain ripping through them. I watched silently, hands in my pockets, just another concerned onlooker. But inside, something settled. Not joy, not triumph, just peace. The truth had begun its descent and nothing could stop it now. But the aftermath, the hospital, the police reports, and the unraveling of their plan, revealed a final twist even I didn't see coming. The ambulance sped down the coastal road toward Ridgeport General, its siren crying out over the choppy waves and early traffic. I followed at a distance, not close enough to raise suspicion, but close enough to watch the aftermath unfold. Lena and Mason were inside that emergency vehicle, their fate sealed by a choice they thought only belonged to them. When I arrived at the hospital, a small crowd had already gathered outside the emergency entrance. Word travels fast in towns like Ridgeport. Two people glued together in a motel room. That kind of story spreads like wildfire. I parked my truck across the street and stepped out, letting the cold breeze wash over me. Paramedics rushed through the sliding doors, pushing the gurney where Lena and Mason lay. Still fused, still covered, still crying out each time the stretcher jolted. Their voices weren't the panicked screams from earlier. These were the broken sounds of people who knew they couldn't hide anymore. Inside the waiting area, officers questioned guests from the Driftwood Inn. Some were shaking. Some were whispering theories. Some couldn't stop laughing nervously. I took a seat near the corner, blending in with the other stunned observers. A nurse passed by, muttering to a colleague, I've never seen adhesion this severe. It's like something industrial. Were they attacked? The colleague whispered. Doesn't seem like it, no signs of force. All the adhesive was applied willingly, apparently. I sipped from the paper cup of water I'd taken earlier and stared into the distance. Industrial indeed. After about 20 minutes, the officers called anyone who had heard or seen anything to step outside for statements. I did the same. A harmless retiree who'd simply been at the wrong place at the right time. I told them I'd heard screaming, that I'd called 911, and that I hoped the couple would be okay. The officer nodded sympathetically, not suspecting a thing. Why would he? No one looks at a 64-year-old man with stiff knees and calloused hands and assumes he orchestrated a meticulously engineered downfall. The real twist arrived when the officers questioned Lena, separately from Mason, once doctors sedated them enough to speak without thrashing. I stayed close enough to overhear fragments blending into the crowd of bystanders again. "Ma'am, do you know what was in the tube?" An officer asked quietly. She told me it was lubricant," Lena sobbed. "I swear I didn't know." "Who told you?" the officer pressed. There was a beat of silence. I almost pitied her. "Mason," she whispered. My lips tightened. Even in agony, even glued to him, she chose the lie that kept her blameless. But as more questions followed, something changed. Her answers began contradicting Mason's. His statements contradicted hers. Their timelines didn't line up. Their stories shifted with every new detail. Lies crumble quickly under pressure, especially when two people are physically unable to turn away from each other. Eventually, Mason broke first. "She planned everything," he shouted from his hospital bed. "She told me she'd get her husband declared incompetent. She wanted to drain his accounts and run off with me. She said he wouldn't notice anything. She said she'd make him look forgetful." Lena's eyes went wide with betrayal. "That's not true," she screamed back. "You said we'd take everything and you'd pay off your debts. You said—" Officers stepped in, silencing them both. In their desperation to escape blame, they exposed the entire conspiracy. Every cruel intention, every scheme, every piece of the plan meant to erase me from my own life, all without a single question directed my way. Their own panic had done the demolition work for me. Within the hour, officers requested financial records. Lena's devices were confiscated, Mason's too. Their messages, handwritten notes, and bank drafts painted the full picture. I sat in the corner of the waiting room while the two of them were separated surgically. A painful, hours-long process that would leave scars they'd never forget. One detective approached me later, explaining gently that I'd likely be contacted for statements once everything was sorted. I nodded, maintaining the quiet grief of a husband blindsided by betrayal. But grief wasn't what settled in my chest that night as I drove home along the darkening coast. It was relief, not because of what had happened to them, but because I still had my life, my home, my sanity. Things they never expected me to fight for. Lena never came back to Red Haven. She relocated somewhere inland after the legal dust settled, too ashamed to face anyone. Mason left the state shortly after, drowning in debt and humiliation. As for me, I returned to my workshop, to the tools that had never lied, to the materials that always behaved the way they promised, to the quiet truth that a man can rebuild anything when he sees the fault lines early enough. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.